Hello, and welcome to Fredericksburg. My name is Judy Laganga, and I am pleased to welcome all of you to the Unity of Fredericksburg weekly online gathering. At Unity of Fredericksburg, we are advancing the movement of spiritual awakening and transformation through unity, a positive path for spiritual living. We thank those of you watching on YouTube live or later and invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you are able to attend live, we encourage you to join us in the Zoom community room for the full Sunday morning experience, including music, prayer, and connection. Our weekly newsletter includes the Sunday service link, and you can subscribe to receive that on our website at uofva.org. That's uofva.org. Our message and meditation today comes from Reverend Richard Pacheco, an ordained Unity minister, speaker, teacher, author, coach, and technology consultant dedicated to helping people live practical, spirit-centered lives. He serves as webmaster for Unity Urban Ministerial School and teaches the Technology and Media in Ministry certification program. Bringing decades of experience in ministry leadership, digital communications, and education. Reverend Richard is the author of 6 teen journals and 3 adult guided journals focused on spiritual growth, emotional healing, self-worth, relationships, and forgiveness. He is also the host of the podcasts Take That Truth and Walk With It and Metaphysics at the Movies, where he blends unity principles, biblical wisdom, and everyday life into engaging, practical conversations. A certified life and relationship coach, Reiki master teacher, and transformational speaker, Reverend Rich is passionate about equipping individuals and organizations with tools for healing, intentional living, and authentic spiritual growth. His mission is to help people discover who they truly are, live with purpose, and bring their highest selves into every encounter. And now, here's Reverend Richard.
All right, thank you for inviting me back again. So I've heard good things about last week, and I'm truly grateful that I was able to gift the first part of this. So we've given you the key. That key was awareness always comes before transformation. That key led to homework. Homework led you on a path that found the door. Now that's the door that we're going to walk through today. And we're going to land on the idea that extraordinary lives are built through ordinary choices made on purpose. So before we start, as always, let us go ahead and pray and take a moment here and just kind of center into this moment, knowing that all we do, every step we take, is in this presence. And when we take that presence and know that we are a part of expressing into our lives all that is here, then we know that our lives will be extraordinary and we will be living intentional. Today, as always, we give thanks for being here. We give thanks allowing me to be a teacher for you today. And as the Deuteronomists always say, I ask that my teachings fall on you like rain, and let my speech settle like dew, like gentle showers on young grass, not only for those listening, but for myself as well, as we know that the lessons we speak through the Christ within are not only for the listeners, but for the speaker as well. And we know that all we want to accomplish is already done because we say it isn't so, we let it be. Amen. So as always, 3 rules. If you were here last week, you heard them. First rule, always don't believe a word I say. The words of T. Harv Eckert from Secrets of a Millionaire Mind. Here at Unity, I always like the from the book How to Speak Unity, where it says my job is not to tell you that we have the right answers, but to help you find those answers within yourself. Secondly, you hear something today that's important to you, then write it down, put it in your phone, share it on social media, whatever it is, but get the message out, because what's important to you is always important to someone else. And one thing I've always learned is that the shortest pencil word is always better than the longest memory. And then finally, as I said, share what you hear today, because you never know when that one nugget that you heard today can help someone else down the road. So as I said, today we're going to talk about small choices and where we went. So last week we talked about awareness. Again, awareness always comes before transformation. We needed to talk about looking at, noticing what's happening in our lives. We looked at our thoughts, our habits, the places where we may have been moving through life without really paying attention, that autopilot that our subconscious puts us through. And we talked about the idea of driving, where you didn't realize how you went from point A to point B without without even noticing how far you went, because your mind was somewhere else. So we make that and we affirm it again, awareness, because changes cannot happen without being noticed. So awareness, that's your key. Awareness doesn't happen without, transformation cannot happen without awareness happening first. So this week, we're going to take it a step further. So we had the key. We found the door. We're going through the door. So we're stepping through. But now we've made the decision. We've walked through the door. We know what we're looking at, but where do we go from here? And that's where intention becomes the most important. And on top of that, we also know the power of will, one of our 12 powers taught to us by our co-founder, Charles Fillmore. So in that, as it has direction in our lives, we make a choice, we make a decision, we take an action. And it is the part that says, this is the way I want to go. And that brings us to the idea that you will carry with you today. Extraordinary lives are built through ordinary choices made on purpose. Not one big decision. We're not trying to fix our lives by Tuesday. We're going to let life take shape through the choices we make over time. So if I look at my own life, I know that I've loved learning. I'm a student for life. I enjoy reading the books. I enjoy the classes I take. I'm always studying something new. I'm like a kid in a candy store. I want to call it ADD, where I'm like squirrel and something else pops up and I want to learn it and I want to teach it. And same thing with a hands-on, I'm a tech person. So if you give me a new technology, I'm going to start pushing buttons, playing with it, trying to figure it out, so that in turn, if it's something important, I can share it. And that's just how I am. And I've collected a lot of information. Again, I wish I had a house with a library like the one behind me, but I had a lot of books and I ended up having to transfer them to Kindle because they were just taking up so much room. So I was ingesting so much information. But the problem was that I had books on spirituality, leadership, technology, ministry, relationships, personal growth, notes in the courses. I have courses and notes and notebooks and journals all over the place. I probably highlighted so much in these books and in my Kindle that the pages should have just been printed on a yellow page. But I had to face something on the way. And I've told this story before, where my senior minister shared it with me, and I'll share it again in a quickness, where it really hit me when I realized in this story that you had a young lady who was suffering from an eating disorder, anorexia. What does she like to do? And she goes, I love to read cookbooks. Of course, everybody's aghast. What do you mean? And she finally said, well, I like reading them, but I never cook them. And I realized that with all these mountains of books that I had and all these courses I took and all these speakers I went to see, I never took action behind them. So when that finally clicked, you know, it really realized that, have I actually did or done what I've read spiritually? Have I read a book and put it into action? I've highlighted passages, listened to these sermons. I've had so many notes. But then, as they say, Monday comes and I no longer did anything. So the practical question here, when we talk about practical spirituality, practical Christianity, is what are we going to do with all this stuff that we were given? And then I started to take one thing I learned and put it into practice. Now, I will admit, this is my testimony, I try to fix it by Tuesday. I try to take everything I learned and say, well, if I do this, I do that, and put it together, it didn't work. One step at a time. I chose one thing, it made a difference in my life. That next thing brought me here. And because it begins to inspire us, and I always love this, there's a book called Aspire, which talks about the etymology of the words, and to inspire is to breathe into. So this information breathed into me, but I never let it out. And I began to practice. And when I did, it began to shape my life. And that's why the idea matters, that extraordinary lives are built through ordinary choices made on purpose. And I'm pretty sure that I'm not the only one here who's trying to do this. A lot of us know there are things in our lives that we probably should be doing. We should be taking better care of ourselves. Should be, there are relationships that need our attention. There are conversations that we needed to have. There are spiritual practices that help us feel grounded. There are financial decisions that we keep postponing. And the problem is that we already know these things. But the real question is whether we know how to be a part of it and how to make it a part of our lives. And that's where spiritual growth becomes practical. And James 1:22 says it best. He says, be the doer of the word and not merely the hearers. And it can't be any clearer than that. We have a lot of people who we hear it, we know it's something good for us, but we never take actions. And even in a lot of our own practical, we love to hear all the great messengers and luminaries in unity, in New Thought, and even in our traditional Christians, there's great messages. I've heard great sermons out there that I can interpret metaphysically. But then, like it says, it came Monday, it was no longer a part of my life. When he says, do something with the word, we know it's about action. We know it's about doing things. Charles Fillmore himself says, truth becomes meaningful when we live it. And we all know where that is. Principle number 5, again, knowing the truth. How do I say? It's not enough to know the truth, but to live, we must live the truth we know. And that's what we call practical spirituality, practical Christianity. And it matters when we talk about practical because the spiritual principles should eventually show up somewhere in your life. It may show up on how you respond to somebody who before you could look at. My wife, I always make this joke and I share it constantly. My wife always told me that as I started moving into the becoming to unity, started looking at, working with programs of Wayne Dyer and things like that, that I went from angry Puerto Rican to big Buddha. And it's because of the practice. So it may show up how you respond to somebody. It may show up how you handled fear this time. It may shape a decision you're about to make. It may change how you take care of yourself. But spiritual truth becomes real when we begin to live from it, when we take action behind it. So I highlighted earlier that this month, some communities do that. We follow every month we follow the power of the month. And this month just happens to be the power of will. And Charles Fillmore refers to will as the executive power of the mind. And I like that phrase because it gives us a picture. An executive helps establish direction. So let's just say the will is the CEO of the mind, helps decide where we're going, where we're placing our energy, what are we doing as we go through this practice. It helps us determine the direction we want our lives to move in. And the will is deeply connected with your intention. And you may notice something in your life that needs attention. Awareness from last week, the key, helped us to see it. Will helps us to respond to it. Now, many times we'll say, "Oh, I see what is happening, and I'm going to choose differently." And this may sound simple. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's hard. But every intentional choice matters. Last week I talked about the book, The Slight Edge. How if I had the graph, it would be almost identical to the two people. But sooner or later, the person on the health track, his health continues to go up, and the person on the whatever I'm going to eat track, his health starts to decline. And it's the same thing here. So we must remember that extraordinary lives are built through ordinary choices made on purpose. So when we look at Joshua 24:15, he says, "Choose this day whom you will serve." And I know the rest of the verse talks about choosing life over. And the word is choose that we want to focus on, because we must use it as an invitation. When we talk about listening to that small, still voice, and you get that knock on your heart or your subconscious saying, "Hey, this is what we want to do. This is what we need to do." We have a choice to make. We can choose to ignore it. We can choose to do it. We can choose to do it in a way that goes against what we feel is right. And in Deuteronomy 30:19 says, "Choose life." And again, the longer verse talks about the choice of good and evil and all of that. But, we're talking about choosing life. What is it that we want in our lives? What are we faced for? What supports our life as we see it? Remember, I can only share my experience. I can't tell you where your life direction is. You make the choice of what supports your life and where you're moving forward. What choice moves me toward the person I want to become? Sometimes the answer will be obvious. It took me a long time to make a decision to become a minister. It took me a long time to get to a point where it's like, I don't want to do the normal routines. I want to serve. I want to help. And part of it is through technology. Part of it is through coaching. Part of it's through ministry. And I found the way that allowed me to encompass all of it. And then there are times where even I'm confused, and we just need to sit with it. And either way, whatever you are at this moment, you're engaging the power of will. You are choosing a direction and making small choices. Now, we talked about again last week, key, door, walk through, great. We're changing our lives. We're looking at intentional living here. We're living from a place of intention. So a lot of us, like I said, want to try to fix it by Tuesday. Well, the problem is that that's one of the most scariest things in the world, because we become overwhelmed. We always tend to think that it's to be big in life, we have to make these big choices. What we want to do is start from a small choice. Most of our lives, however, is built from smaller moments. Think of planting a flower. Imagine going out to a garden, planting the flower, putting the soil over it, watering it, and standing there and waiting till something pops up. I love the stories of the bamboo, and it's funny because on my brother's property where I live, there's a whole forest of bamboo right outside where nothing happens for 5 years. Anybody ever had the same plan where 5 years later you wake up and go, "Oh, nothing's happening"? But for those who chose the small choices, the constant action for those 5 years begins to see the fruit of their labor. Our lives kind of work the same way. A 5-minute prayer in the morning may feel like you've done nothing. A healthy choice, changing, maybe giving up a snack that you like constantly for something healthier, may feel like nothing new. Making one healthy choice may feel small. Having an honest conversation may feel small. These choices begin creating a direction. And this was something I used in my talk last week, and I thought it was bear repeating. Luke 16:10 says, "Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much." And the rest of that verse actually says, and those who are deceitful in very little will be deceitful in very much. And that's something that I always like to touch on, is because our own choices lead us in the direction that we want to go. We choose not to do something, even though everything in our system is telling us to do it, and things don't seem to be working out, then what we need to do is revisit the awareness that we made a choice, and that choice was not the one that we should have, or the path, or maybe we allowed something to convince us, social media, television, whatever it is, or friends who thought they were caring for us, to lead a different lives. We need to realize that when we point our attention to the small details, the small actions we can take, we start to change things. We spend far more time in ordinary moments than we do in dramatic ones. This means that every ordinary moment in our lives matter. It could be as small as just thanking someone and feeling good about it, or even receiving a thank you and feeling good about it. Your life can be shaped while you're making dinner. It can be shaped while you're deciding how to respond to someone. It's being shaped wherever you choose to put your attention at. And those moments begin to add up. Charles Fillmore wrote, "I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm and spring forth with mighty faith to do the things you ought to be done by me." There is one part of that affirmation I'd love to focus on, is the things that ought to be done by me. And it's important because there are steps and things that we need to make choices of. Earlier, a conversation talked about one of the journals I wrote was for men. And it was because I had a coach who helped me tremendously when he said, stop focusing on everybody and everything outside of you. Start to focus on what makes Richard the best Richard he can be. And when you do that, you begin to realize and become aware of the things that belong to you, your choices, your responses, your next steps. There are not have to be managing anybody else's life. There's a book, which I know the title tends to be a little misleading. It's called The Courage to Be Disliked. And at first I read it going, okay, this is going to be one of those books that going to tell you that, oh, I don't mind being hated. No, it had nothing to do with that. If anything else, it was one of the most loving books I read, because it taught me that people's tasks, as he labeled them, people's issues, people's traumas, people's things that I would take upon myself because I was in that space of, I want to save the world, was not mine to do. What was mine to do was to look at my choices, my reactions, my actions. And that began the space to change my life. It changed how I responded to things. And even when I'm still triggered on certain things, I still have a choice, a decision, and an action I can take. And that is the power of will. So let me ask you a question. What choices you already know that you need to make? Choose one, just one choice that you already know that you need to make, and keep it small, keep it manageable. We don't need to save everything. And then when we make that choice, take the action. Maybe you want to begin praying for 5 minutes every morning. Maybe it's someone that you need to pick up a phone and call. Maybe you need to look at your finances instead of avoiding them. I've done that. Maybe your body needs more care. Maybe there's something you need to forgive. And that was a big one in my life. Maybe you need to create a boundary. Maybe you need to make room for something that brings you joy. Just pick one. The power of making a clear decision is a power that's innate to you. And there is power that grows from there. You don't need to overhaul your entire life this week. You need a direction. You need to take that next available step and begin to live in that space that extraordinary lives are built through ordinary choices made on purpose. So, one of my mentors always said, when she goes out to speak, she gives something away. When I'm virtual, it's kind of hard for me to give something from here. But what I have done, and I am putting the link in the chat, and I guess can be shared later, is a intentional life plan where we're going to look at a few areas of life and choose one action in each area. So for your spiritual life, you may ask, what practice would help me feel more connected to spirit this week? Maybe for your relationship, who needs some attention from me? From your health, what is one choice that supports my well-being? For service, where can I be useful? For finances, what is one decision that would bring me more attention to the way I handle money? Maybe for joy in life, what gives me life and how can I make room for it? You don't need complicated answers. We just need to make choices that we are willing to put into practice. So, your homework this week. As always, I give homework, always a warning. Here's your homework for this week. Each morning before the day gets moving, ask yourself, what is one intentional choice I can make today? Then carry that with you all day. And make that choice in action somewhere along the way. And then at night, very simply ask, did I live with intention today? That's where your intentional life begins. When you can start the day and say, what is the one intentional choice I can do today? And then at night, you inspect what you expect. Did I live intentionally today? And we're not looking for a pass fail. We're not looking for you to put yourself down. All we're asking you to do is do a notice, because last week we taught awareness. This week we had the choice. And if the day doesn't go the way you want, you have another chance tomorrow. And that's the point of practice. One thing I want you to remember, because we tend to beat ourselves up, is that intentional choices always do not create immediate results. We talked about that earlier. We begin praying and still feel uncertain about what we're doing. We change a habit, but you still have work to do. It didn't fix it all. You apologize and discover that healing takes time. That doesn't make the choices meaningless. Galatians 6:7 says, let us not grow weary in doing what is right, for we will reap at harvest time if we do not give up. We talked about the 5-year bamboo growth. If we continue to do the small choices daily, we continue to do it even when it all feels like it's not working, we know that results will begin to happen. Your growth takes time. Your work is to stay connected to the direction you have chosen. You keep showing up, you keep learning, you keep making the next choice, keep taking the next step of who you want to become. Martin Luther King's quote, you don't need to see the top of the stairs to know that you have to take the next step. So I want to think about when you create a community such as your unity or all our unities, or even just community of friends that sit together and talk about this. What happens when a whole community begins to live in this way? People start becoming more thoughtful of their choices. Relationships begin receiving more attention. People become more conscious of how they use their time. Service becomes something we practice on an everyday basis. Spiritual principles begin showing up outside of Sunday morning. And this is how we begin to grow intentionally living communities. This is how these communities go out and faith becomes visible. Not just a belief, but becomes visible. People begin to live what they say they believe, and changes happen through ordinary decisions, which brings us back to that big idea. Extraordinary lives are built through ordinary choices made on purpose. So let's go back to week 1. Week 1 was about waking up. We learned to notice what was happening in our lives. And the idea was that you cannot change what you do not notice, or awareness always comes before transformation. And today we added a step. Once you noticed, you get to choose. Awareness gives you that clarity, and the power of will gives you the direction you want to go. And together, they help you live with intention. And this is how the two messages that I was blessed to give you connect. You must first become present in your life, which creates the awareness, and then you decide how you want to participate in that intentional life. So let me leave you with a final scripture here. Philippians 2:13 says, "For it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for God's good pleasure." And what I love about this is it reminds us that something is working in us. We talked about the levels of consciousness last week, and there's vessel and verity where we realize that it's something that's working through us or as us. But the beautiful part of this, and I even included this in a new project I have for another teen journal, is when we realize that divine spark we have in ourselves, we no longer feel alone. We start moving in an intentional direction because we have something guiding us, something helping us to make that decision, something that taps into the power of will and says, we've made our choice. We know what's going on. We need to move in a certain direction. Where are we going? Now let's take that step. Spirit is always inviting us toward greater expression. And sometimes that invitation shows up as a desire to change. It may show up as a quiet knowing that it's time to move. Our job is to pay attention and respond. The response may begin with one choice. One decision can create a new direction and then continue from there. So what I ask you is tomorrow morning before the day becomes busy, give yourself a moment. Take a breath. Remember the power of will is already within yourself. And again, ask yourself, what is one intentional choice I can make today? And then listen. Then act upon what you know. Give yourself permission to grow at a human's pace. Pay attention, keep choosing. Your future's being shaped in ordinary moments. And that's why those moments matter so much. And that is why I want you to remember this. Extraordinary lives are built through ordinary choices made on purpose. We became aware last week. We chose our direction this week. So as always, such as my podcast, I want you to take the truth you received today and walk with it. So with that, I am so grateful for being here today, and let's go ahead and take it into meditation. So let's go ahead and take a deep breath here. We've heard a lot. We may have been triggered a little bit, and that's okay. Let's take that deep breath and just release any feelings we have right now that aren't serving us, and know that we're just sitting in our moment. These feelings may come back later, and this is where we begin our awareness and choices. And as we take our next breath, I want you to release anything you're worried about, anything that may have been triggered from your past that no longer exists other than in your mind. And on that breath, just let it go. And on your next breath, go ahead and release anything that you're worried about. Oh, am I going to remember to do my homework this week? What's going to come up when I ask those questions? Release it. They're not even happening yet. We want to be present in this moment, right here, right now. And just return to your normal breath and realize the path we've taken. Last week, we asked you to become aware of the things in your life, to become aware of the path in front of us. And it was through that awareness we found the key. But it was through the practice that we found the door. In using that key to open that door that belongs to only you, we begin our journey. And this week, we tap into the power of our will. We tap into that space within ourselves, being present and listening for that small, still voice. So let's take a moment and just ask ourselves as we leave today, even though it's a little bit past our waking hour, but when we leave today, what is one intentional choice I can make and carry through my day. And let me leave you with that for a few moments. And if you heard the voice, great. If you didn't, trust me, it'll show up sometime today. And I want you to carry this with you. I want you to be gentle with yourself. Because even if it doesn't unfold, the choices you make will begin that journey. Those small choices that will take you to that promised land. But what I will affirm over you today is that when we make that intentional choice and we put it into action, we know it's already done because we've spoken it. We live in gratitude for it. And we say it isn't so, it isn't so, we let it be. As we return to this present moment, knowing that all is well. Take a deep breath in, let it out. And when you're so fun, go ahead and open your eyes. And as always, I am truly grateful for the invitation to speak these last 2 weeks. And I am truly grateful that you allowed me to share my gifts with you. So thank you.
Thank you for that. That was great. Thanks for watching the weekly broadcast from Unity of Fredericksburg. Visit our website, uofva.org, to learn more about our mission of spiritual awakening and transformation, and support our ministry with your financial donation.